It was a Tuesday afternoon when I realized I was ghost in my own hallways. The grandfather clock in the foyer, the one Arthur and I bought in Munich 40 years ago, ticked with a deafening rhythm that seemed to count the seconds of my irrelevance. I had set the table for 4 as I always did on Tuesdays. Roast chicken with a rosemary from the garden, Julian's favorite. Mashed potatoes with extra butter for Leo. A crisp salad for Sarah, who was always on some sort of cleanse. I sat there in my Sunday best, a string of pearls tight against my throat, watching the steam rise and then vanish from the serving platters. I waited. 1 hour turned into 2. The golden skin of the chicken began to shrivel, and the potatoes developed a cold, gray skin. My phone sat beside my plate, silent as a grave. They didn't call to say they were late. They didn't text to say they weren't coming. They simply assumed I would be here waiting because that is what mothers do. We are the furniture of their lives, solid, dependable, and invisible until someone needs a place to sit. I felt a cold lump form in my chest that had nothing to do with the draft under the kitchen door. I thought to myself, I've spent 72 years building a fortress of love, so why do I feel like a prisoner in a tomb? If you're still here, welcome to Voice of Jenna, a place where stories aren't just told, they're felt. Here, we dive into real emotions, family drama, quiet heartbreaks, unexpected twists, and the moments that change us. So sit back, relax, and let me tell you what happened next. I remember when the house was loud. Arthur would come through that front door, dropping his briefcase with a heavy thud, and the kids would swarm him like bees to clover. We were a unit. We were a legacy. Back then, I believed that every sacrifice I made, every career opportunity one passed up to stay home, every penny I saved to put into their college funds, was a brick in the wall of my future security. I was told, and I believed, that if I poured my life into them, they would be the reservoir that sustained me in my winter years. That was my thesis, my life's logic. A mother's duty is to give until she is empty, for her children are the vessel of her immortality. I had emptied myself, truly. I had signed over the family business to Julian when he struggled. I had paid off Sarah's mounting credit card debts 3 times over. I had given Leo the down payment for a house he sold 6 months later to go find himself in Europe. I gave, and I gave, thinking that love was a transaction that guaranteed presence. But as I sat at that cold table, I realized the transaction had been processed, and the account was overdrawn. I finally picked up the phone. My fingers trembled as I dialed Julian.
It went to voicemail.
I called Sarah. She picked up, but the background noise was a roar of music and laughter. "Mom, why are you calling? Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice laced with an irritation that cut deeper than any knife. I looked at the 3 empty chairs. "It's Tuesday, Sarah. The roast is cold." There was a pause, a sigh of pure inconvenience. "Oh, Mom, we're at the opening of that new gallery. I told you, or maybe I didn't. Look, you have the leftovers, okay? I've gotta go. My drink is here."
Click.
She didn't ask how I was. She didn't apologize. She treated me like a telemarketer who had interrupted her real life. I looked at the chicken. I had spent 4 hours preparing this meal. I had walked to the market in the rain because my hip was acting up and I didn't want to drive. I sat back, the pearls feeling like they were choking me. I reached up and unclipped them, laying the strand on the table next to the cold gravy. I realized then that my children didn't see a woman when they looked at me. They saw an ATM that occasionally produced home-cooked meals. They saw a title deed with gray hair. That night, I didn't go to bed. I walked through the house, touching the walls, looking at the photos. There was the portrait of us at the lake, everyone smiling, leaning in. But as I looked closer, I saw the cracks. Even then, Julian's eyes were on his watch. Sarah was posing for a camera that wasn't there. Leo was pulling away. I had been the glue, holding together people who were desperate to be apart. Arthur had left me this house, the stocks, and a substantial trust. He had trusted me to manage it, to keep the family legacy alive. But a legacy isn't wood and stone, it's blood and honor. And my blood was looking at me like I was a countdown clock to their next payday. I heard a car pull into the driveway late that night. It was Julian. He had a key, of course. He didn't knock. He walked in, smelling of expensive scotch and cigars, the kind I'm sure he bought with a loan I gave him last month. He didn't see me sitting in the dark living room. He went straight to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and started eating the chicken over the sink with his bare hands. He looked around the kitchen, his eyes lingering on the crown molding, the high-end appliances, the view of the garden. He didn't see the woman who had scrubbed those floors. He saw square footage. He pulled out his phone and made a call. I sat as still as a statue, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Yeah, I'm at the house now," he whispered into the phone. "It's massive. If we can get her to move into that assisted living place downtown, we could list this by spring. Sarah found a developer who wants the lot. We just need to get the paperwork handled. She's getting forgetful anyway. Did you see her face when I didn't show for dinner? She's losing it. It won't be hard to prove she can't manage the estate anymore." He laughed quietly, a dry, cruel sound, and took another bite of the chicken I had lovingly prepared. I felt a coldness wash over me that was absolute. My own son was talking about me like I was a problem to be solved, a hurdle to his profit. The wound was no longer a dull ache. It was a gaping canyon. I watched him lick his fingers and leave the room, headed toward his old bedroom to sleep off the liquor. He didn't even check to see if I was breathing. I stood up in the shadows, my legs surprisingly steady. The woman who would have done anything for her children died in that chair at that moment. The woman who remained was someone I hadn't seen in decades, the woman Arthur had married because she was fierce, sharp, and took no nonsense. I walked to the hallway mirror and looked at my reflection. My eyes were wet, but my jaw was set. They thought I was a crumbling ruin they could pave over. They thought they could wait for the clock to run out so they could pick my pockets. But they forgot one very important thing. I don't just live in this house. I own it. I own the business, the land, and every single cent Arthur left behind. And if they want to treat me like a stranger, then a stranger is exactly who they are going to deal with. I went to my desk and pulled out a single sheet of stationery. My hand didn't shake as I wrote the date. I didn't write a suicide note, and I didn't write a plea for love. I wrote a list of every debt, every lie, and every moment of neglect. Underneath it, I wrote the name of the only person I could still trust, Arthur's old partner, the meanest lawyer in the state. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn Julian wanted to sell, I made a silent vow. If they wanted my life to be a business arrangement, I would give them the deal of a lifetime. I would let them think they were winning. I would play the part of the confused, aging mother until every piece of the trap was set. They think they are the heirs to a fortune. They don't realize they are the beneficiaries of an empty box. I walked past Julian's closed door, hearing his heavy snoozing, and I didn't feel a flicker of maternal warmth. I felt the thrill of a hunter. The game had changed, and the first move was mine. Will Eleanor go through with the meeting? And what happens when Julian finds the first piece of the puzzle she's about to leave behind? The sun rose on Wednesday morning with a clarity that felt like a personal insult. I didn't sleep. I stayed in my wingback chair, watching the dust motes dance in the light Julian was so eager to sell. I watched him descend the stairs at 10, nursing a hangover and looking at the family portraits with the eyes of an appraiser, not a son. He didn't offer a good morning. He didn't apologize for raiding the fridge or ignoring the Tuesday dinner. He just grunted, grabbed his car keys, and left, likely to meet Sarah to discuss which rooms they'd strip first once I was safely tucked away in a care facility. As soon as his car cleared the driveway, the fragile version of Eleanor stayed in that chair, and the architect of my own salvation stood up. I went to the master bedroom and opened the small floor safe hidden beneath the loose floorboard in the closet, a secret Arthur and I shared. Inside wasn't just jewelry or gold. It was the leverage. Folders of documents detailing Julian's consulting fees that were actually embezzled funds from the family trust. Records of the debts I'd quietly paid for Sarah to keep her out of court. I put them in my handbag, which suddenly felt heavier than a lead brick. I drove to the downtown offices of Vaughn and Associates. Arthur's old partner, Robert Vaughn, was 80 if he was a day, but his mind was a steel trap that only caught the guilty. Walking into his office felt like entering a sanctuary. The smell of old leather and expensive stationery steadied my breathing. Robert looked at me over his spectacles, his expression softening for only a second before returning to his usual professional mask. "Eleanor, you look like you've seen a ghost," he said, pulling out a chair for me. "No, Robert," I replied, my voice holding a resonance I hadn't used in years. "I've seen a pack of wolves. And they carry my last name." I laid out the files. I told him what I heard in the kitchen. I told him about the Tuesday dinner and the calculated neglect. Robert's eyes darkened. He had known Arthur for 50 years. He had seen the work we put into building this life. To see the children of his best friend circling like vultures was a personal affront to him. "They want to declare you incompetent, Eleanor," Robert said, his finger tapping the file on the consulting fees. "It's a common tactic. If they can prove you aren't of sound mind, they can bypass the trust restrictions Arthur set up. They don't just want a piece of the pie. They want the bakery and the land it sits on." "I know," I said. "And that is why I want to burn the bakery down. Legally speaking." Robert leaned back, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Go on." "I want to begin a process of liquidating and liberating.
I want to sell the mountain house first.
Then the stocks. I want to move every liquid asset into a private foundation. I want my children to think I am losing my grip on reality while I am actually tightening my grip on my autonomy. If they want to treat me like a stranger, I will treat them like a bad investment." The plan was simple but brutal. Phase 1. The mountain house. It was where the children spent their summers, where they expect to host their fancy parties once I'm gone. It's worth millions. By selling it quietly through Robert's shell company, I would drain the first major reservoir of their inheritance. I spent 3 hours with Robert drafting the letters of intent. Each signature felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. I wasn't just signing away property. I was signing away my role as the enabler. I drove home with a strange sense of euphoria, but as I pulled into the drive, I saw Sarah's bright red convertible blocked by Julian's SUV. My heart spiked. They were both here. This was unusual for a Wednesday afternoon. Usually, they only gathered when they were planning a coordinated attack on my wallet. I walked in through the mudroom, keeping my handbag tight to my side. I could hear their voices in the parlor. The room with the fine china that they used to complain was too stuffy. Now, they were in there with a tape measure. I stood in the doorway, my face a mask of practiced confusion. "Sarah? Julian? What a surprise," I said, my voice fluttering with a fake frailty that made my skin crawl. "I thought you were busy today." Sarah turned around, a measuring tape draped around her neck like a snake. "Oh, Mom, you're back. We were just looking at the floor plan. Julian thinks there's some dry rot in the parlor, and we wanted to see if we needed to call a contractor. You know, to keep the house in good shape for you." Julian nodded, a slick smile on his face.
Exactly.
"We just want to make sure the value holds up. You've been so forgetful lately. We figured we'd handle the maintenance." "Dry rot?" I asked, squinting as if I couldn't quite see the spot. "I haven't noticed any. That's the thing about rot, Mom," Julian said, stepping closer and putting a heavy, patronizing arm around my shoulders. "It happens beneath the surface. By the time you notice it, the whole structure is ready to collapse. It's safer if you let us make the big decisions from now on." I felt the heat rising in my neck. The thesis line echoed in my head. I thought if I gave them everything, they would love me. The lie was dead now. I looked at the measuring tape in Sarah's hands, the hands I had held when she had her first fever, the hands that were now measuring my parlor for a renovation she wouldn't live to see. "You're right, Julian," I said, my voice thin. "I have been forgetful. Why, I forgot where I put the keys to the mountain house just this morning. Maybe you should go up there this weekend and look for them? I'd hate for the house to sit empty if there's work to be done." They traded a quick, greedy glance. The mountain house was the prize they wanted most. "That's a great idea, Mom," Sarah said, her eyes shining with the prospect of a weekend in the pines. "We'll go up on Friday. Just give us the alarm codes." "Of course, dear. I'll write them down for you," I said. I turned to go to my desk, my heart thumping. I wasn't giving them the keys to a vacation. I was giving them the keys to a house that was going on the market at 9 a.m. on Friday morning. They were going up there to celebrate their control, unaware that the sold signs were already being printed. I sat at the desk and wrote out the codes. My hand was steady. As they left, laughing about their weekend plans, Julian paused at the door. "Oh, and Mom? Don't worry about dinner tonight. Sarah and I are going out.
You just relax.
Maybe have some of those leftovers." I watched them drive away, two thieves in the night. I walked back into the parlor and looked at the spot they were measuring. They were right about one thing. There was rot in this house. But it wasn't in the floorboards. It was in the hearts of the people I had raised. I picked up the phone and called Robert. "The bait is taken. They're headed to the mountain house this weekend. List it.
Now."
But as the phone clicked shut, I heard a sound from the basement. I forgot that Leo had his own key, and Leo wasn't looking for a house. He was looking for something much smaller and much more dangerous. The sound from the basement was a rhythmic thud, followed by the metallic screech of a file cabinet drawer being forced open. My heart, which had been hardened by the defiance I'd felt moments ago, suddenly stuttered. I had forgotten about Leo. Julian and Sarah were the wolves, visible and snarling, but Leo, my youngest, my baby, was the fox. He didn't want the square footage or the social status. He wanted the liquid, the portable, and the untraceable. I moved quietly toward the basement door. I didn't turn on the lights. I had lived in this house for 40 years. I knew every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the wood. I stood at the top of the stairs, peering into the gloom. Down there, lit only by the flashlight on his phone, was Leo. He was kneeling in front of the heavy industrial safe Arthur had used for his precious metal collection, the rainy day fund that we kept in gold coins and bearer bonds. "Leo?" I whispered. My voice wasn't frail this time. It was cold as the basement floor. He jumped, his phone skittering across the concrete, the beam of light sweeping across the room like a searchlight.
"Mom."
"God, you scared me." I was just looking for my old baseball glove. I thought it was in the storage bin down here. "The baseball glove you haven't touched in 15 years is kept in a lock safe?" I asked, stepping down the first 2 stairs. The shadows made me look taller than I felt. Leo stood up, brushing the dust from his designer jeans. He tried to summon that boyish grin, the one that used to melt my heart whenever he came home with a bad report card or a dented fender. "You know how it is. I thought maybe Dad put it in there for safekeeping. You've been so scattered lately. I figured I'd help look before you forgot where the combination was." The thesis line tried to worm its way back in. He's just the baby. He's scared of the future. He needs you. I pushed it back into the dark. "I know the combination, Leo. I also know that you've already tried 3 different sequences tonight." I heard the lock clicking from the kitchen.
His face changed.
The boyish charm evaporated, replaced by a sullen, jagged resentment. "Why keep it locked anyway, Mom? It's just sitting there." "I'm struggling. My startup needs a bridge loan, and you're sitting on a pile of gold coins like a dragon in a cave. Do you have any idea how selfish that looks?" "Selfish." I repeated the word. It tasted like ash. I had worked 2 jobs while Arthur built the firm to make sure Leo never had a student loan. I had bailed him out of 3 separate business ventures that were nothing more than glorified hobbies. "I have given you everything I have to give, Leo. The gold in that safe is my medical fund. It is my security for when my body finally fails me. Do you expect me to sell my health for your bridge loan?" Leo stepped closer, his shadow looming large against the concrete wall. "I expect you to act like a mother. A mother wants her children to succeed. What's the point of you having security if I'm drowning? You're 72, Mom. Your future is a lot shorter than mine." The cruelty of it shouldn't have surprised me, not after what I heard Julian say, but hearing it from Leo felt like a physical blow to the stomach. Your future is a lot shorter than mine. He was already measuring me for the shroud. He didn't see a life worth living. He saw a biological clock ticking down to his payout. "Get out," I said quietly. "Mom, get out of my basement, Leo. And leave the key on the kitchen counter. If you enter this house again without an invitation, I will call the police." And I will make sure the report mentions you were attempting to break into a safe. He stared at me, shocked. I had never spoken to him like that. I had always been the cushion he landed on. Seeing me as a brick wall made him angry. Fine, he spat, grabbing his phone. Enjoy your coins, Scrooge. When you're sitting in this big, empty house wondering why no one calls, remember this moment. You chose pieces of metal over your son. He stormed up the stairs, past me, his shoulder clipping mine. I heard the kitchen door slam. I heard the screech of his tires on the gravel. I stood in the dark basement, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked at the safe. He hadn't gotten in, but he would be back. They all would be. I walked to the kitchen and looked at the counter. The key was there, but beside it was a folded piece of paper he must have dropped. I picked it up. It was a brochure for Serenity Meadows Luxury Assisted Living. There were red circles around the memory care wing. In the margin, in Sarah's handwriting, it said, Julian thinks we can move her by next month if we play the safety angle. Leo, get the combination before she goes. A cold, hard resolve settled over me. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were planning to bury me alive. I picked up the phone and dialed Robert Vaughn's private cell. It was late, but he answered on the second ring. Robert? It's Eleanor. We need to move faster. I want the Mountain House listing to go live tomorrow. And I want you to send a private security team to my primary residence. Change the locks at 8 a.m. And Robert? Yes, Eleanor? I want to change the trust, not just the Mountain House. Everything. I want a moral turpitude clause. I want to specify that any child who attempts to litigate my mental capacity is immediately and irrevocably disinherited. And then, I want to name a new beneficiary. Who did you have in mind? Robert asked, his voice curious. I looked at the brochure for Serenity Meadows, at the red circles around my future prison. I looked at the cold chicken still sitting on the counter from my lonely dinner. The Arthur Sterling Memorial Scholarship Fund. It's for students who have lost their parents. I think it's time my money went to people who actually understand the value of family. I hung up. I felt a strange lightness. For decades, I had been the enabler, the woman who smoothed over the cracks and ignored the rot because the truth was too painful to face. But the truth was here now, in black and white and red circles. I went to the front door and engaged the deadbolt. For the first time in years, I didn't leave the porch light on for them. I went upstairs, pulled out my old leather suitcase, and began to pack. Not because I was leaving, but because I was reclaiming the woman who was brave enough to go anywhere she pleased. As I folded my favorite silk scarf, I heard a car door slam outside. But it wasn't the children. It was a man I hadn't seen in 20 years, standing under the street lamp, looking up at my window with an expression I couldn't read. What did Julian's biggest rival want with me in the middle of the night? The man under the street lamp was Samuel Thorne. 20 years ago, he had been Arthur's primary business rival, a man who fought for every market share with the tenacity of a bulldog. After Arthur passed, Samuel had vanished into a quiet retirement, or so I thought. Seeing him now, leaning against a silver sedan with his coat collar turned up against the evening chill, felt like a message from a ghost. I didn't open the window. I went down to the front door, my hand hovering over the newly engaged deadbolt. Samuel? I called out through the heavy oak. It's nearly midnight. If you're looking for the firm, it moved downtown a decade ago. I'm not here for the firm, Eleanor. His voice crackled through the wood, deep and gravelly. I'm here because I still have friends in title insurance. I saw a Mountain House hit a private listing pool 4 hours ago, a house I know Arthur vowed never to sell. I figured either you were dead or you were at war. And since I don't see a hearse, I assume you're looking for ammunition. I opened the door just a crack. The cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain and expensive tobacco. Samuel looked aged, his face a map of old battles, but his eyes were sharp. Why do you care? I asked. Because Arthur was the only man I ever respected, he said simply. And because I've seen your son Julian in action. He's been trying to sell me insider information on your holdings for months to cover his own margins. He thinks I'm a vulture. He doesn't realize I don't eat my own kind. I opened the door fully. Come in, Samuel. I've just put the kettle on, though I suspect you'd prefer something stronger. We sat in the kitchen, the room that had felt like a tomb just hours prior. Samuel didn't look at the decor. He looked at the files I hadn't yet put away. He saw the Serenity Meadows brochure. He saw the red circles. He didn't offer pity. He offered a grim nod of recognition. They're moving faster than you think, Samuel said, accepting a glass of Arthur's old scotch. Julian didn't just contact me. He's reached out to 3 different developers. They aren't just looking at the mountain house, Eleanor. They've already done a preliminary survey of this property. They think they can squeeze 4 luxury townhomes onto this lot once the existing structure is demolished. Existing structure. That was me. That was my life. The walls that held my children's growth charts, the fireplace where we hung stockings, the porch where Arthur and I watched the lightning storms. To them, it was just existing structure. They're going up to the mountain house Friday morning, I said, my voice hardening. They think they are going there to look for keys I lost. They expect a weekend of champagne and planning their new lives. Samuel chuckled, a dry sound like leaves on pavement. And instead, they'll find a for sale sign and a lockbox. But you have to realize, Eleanor, that will only make them desperate. A wounded predator is more dangerous than a hungry one. The moment they realize the well is dry, they will stop playing the concerned children and start playing the aggrieved heirs. They will file the injunction. They will try to lock you out of your accounts before Monday morning. I have Robert Vaughn, I said. Robert is a great lawyer, but he plays by the rules, Samuel countered, leaning forward. Your children have stopped playing by the rules.
You need a shadow.
You need someone to move the liquid assets where Julian's creditors can't find them and where Leo's sticky fingers can't reach. I looked at him, searching for the catch. And what do you want to return, Samuel? You didn't drive here at midnight out of the goodness of your heart. I want the pleasure of watching them fail, he said, his eyes gleaming with a cold fire. And, perhaps, first right of refusal on the mountain house. I always liked that view. I'd keep it exactly as it is. No townhomes. No developments. Just the mountains. I felt a surge of antithesis, the empowered response to the children's greed. A mother's duty is to protect the legacy from those who would burn it for warmth.
Done, I said.
But we move tonight. I want every shared account emptied. I want the trust's power of attorney transferred to a neutral board. And I want a security team at the store by dawn. We spent the rest of the night at the kitchen table. Samuel had connections I didn't even know existed. We moved digital assets through 3 different layers of protection. We drafted the moral turpitude clause Robert had suggested, but we added a clawback provision. Every cent I had loaned them over the last 5 years was now classified as an advance on an inheritance that would never come. Legally, they didn't just own nothing. They owed me. As the sun began to gray the sky on Thursday morning, Samuel stood up to leave. You've done it, Eleanor. You've pulled the rug. Just make sure you're not standing on it when you yank. I'm standing on solid ground, Samuel. For the first time in a long time. I watched him drive away just as a black SUV pulled into the far end of the street. 2 men in suits got out, my new security. They went to work quietly, changing the locks on the gates, the garage, and every entry point. By noon, my phone began to vibrate. It was Sarah.
Mom?
I'm at the bank. There seems to be a clerical error with the joint emergency fund. The teller says the account is closed. I'm sure it's just a mistake, but I need to pay the deposit for that charity gala tonight. Can you call them? I looked at the phone. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. 10 minutes later, Julian called. Mom, listen. Some weird guys are at the house. They won't let my contractor in. I told them I'm your son, but they're acting like they don't know who I am. Tell them to clear out, okay? I've got a lot of people coming by today. I blocked the number. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't the silence of neglect. It was the silence of a fortress. I walked to the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea, real tea, the expensive loose-leaf kind I usually saved for special occasions. Today was a special occasion. It was the day I stopped being a victim of my own kindness. I looked at the Serenity Meadows brochure one last time before dropping it into the trash compactor. I pressed the button and listened to the sound of their plans being crushed into a tiny, worthless cube. But the real test was coming. Tomorrow was Friday. They would arrive at the mountain house, expecting a victory lap. Instead, they would find the first wall of the labyrinth I had built for them. I went to my room and pulled out a simple black dress. I had one final invitation to send out. A family dinner. Sunday night. The Last Supper. I wanted to see their faces when they realized the existing structure was still standing and that they were the ones who were out in the cold. I was about to send the text when a notification popped up on my tablet. A legal alert. Julian hadn't waited for the mountain house. He had filed an emergency ex parte motion for temporary guardianship, claiming I had been misled by a suspicious associate. He was coming for me legally before I could finish the sell-off. The war wasn't coming. It was in my driveway. The flash of the legal alert on my tablet felt like the first gust of wind before a hurricane. Julian wasn't just greedy. He was desperate. By filing for emergency guardianship, he was attempting to strip me of my personhood before the sun set. In his eyes, I was no longer a mother. I was a disputed asset. I looked out the window. The security team Samuel helped me hire, 2 men who looked as immovable as the oaks in my yard, stood firm at the gate. But a legal paper can sometimes do what a battering ram cannot. If a judge signed that order, those men would have to step aside, and Julian would walk through my front door with a social worker and a set of handcuffs disguised as medical care. I didn't panic. I felt a cold, crystalline focus. I picked up the landline, the one Julian didn't know I still had active, and called Robert Vaughn. They moved Robert. Julian filed the motion. He's claiming undue influence from Samuel Thorne. I see it. Robert's voice was like grinding gravel. He's playing dirty. He's used a friendly judge in the 3rd District who owes his father-in-law a favor. Eleanor, you need to be prepared. They might show up with a sheriff for a wellness check. If you seem agitated, if you scream, if you resist, you play right into their narrative that you've lost your grip. So I stay calm, I said, my hand tightening on the receiver. Stay calm, stay silent, and let me handle the countermotion. But Eleanor, keep that security team tight. Don't let Julian in that house without a uniformed officer and a signed order. Once he's inside, he'll start clearing the evidence of your autonomy. I hung up. I went to the kitchen and looked at the clock. 2 p.m. The mountain house sale was processing, but the deed wouldn't be recorded until Monday morning. I was in the dead zone, the time when I was most vulnerable. Around 3:30 p.m., the sound of a heavy engine growled at the end of the drive. I didn't peek through the curtains like a frightened mouse. I stood on the porch, my back straight, my white hair brushed into a sharp bob. I was the mistress of this manor, and I would be treated as such. It was Julian's SUV, followed by Sarah's red convertible. They stopped at the gate. I watched the security guard step forward, holding up a hand. Julian climbed out of the car, waving a sheaf of papers like a flag of truce. Even from the porch, I could see the sweat on his brow. He was a man who had gambled his life on an inheritance that was vanishing like smoke. I have a court order, Julian shouted, his voice cracking. Move the gate. My mother is being held against her will. Sarah got out too, her phone raised, recording the scene. She was probably already drafting the caption, saving our mother from a predator. Heartbroken but determined. Mom, Sarah screamed over the gate. Mom, just come out. We know Samuel is in there. We know he's making you sell everything. We just want to protect you. The security guard looked back at me. I gave a single firm shake of my head. I walked down the steps, my cane clicking rhythmically on the stone. I stopped 10 feet from the gate. I am perfectly protected, Sarah, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the crisp air. I am protected from the rain, the cold, and the ungrateful. I am not being held. I am, for the first time in 20 years, holding my own keys. Mom, you're sick, Julian yelled, gripping the iron bars. You sold the mountain house. I saw the internal listing. That's our house. That's Dad's legacy. You have no right to touch it without talking to us. The thesis line burned in my throat. I thought it was their legacy. It was never your house, Julian, I said, stepping closer until I could see the greed dancing in his eyes. It was the fruit of your father's labor and my support. You treated it like a clubhouse. You treated this house like a bank. And you treated me like a vault that you could drill into whenever the interest was due. Open this gate, or I'm calling the sheriff. Julian roared, shaking the iron. Call him, I replied. But make sure he brings a copy of your bank statements from the last 5 years. I'd love to show him the consulting fees you've been siphoning from the trust. I'm sure a judge would be very interested in why an incompetent woman was paying for your luxury car leases. Julian's face went pale. The shaking stopped. He looked at Sarah, who lowered her phone. They hadn't expected me to have the receipts ready. They expected a confused old woman they could steamroll with legal jargon. You think you're so smart, Julian hissed, leaning his forehead against the bars. But wait until Monday. The judge will grant the full hearing. You'll be in a room with 3 doctors and you won't remember what you ate for breakfast because you're so stressed. And then everything comes to us. We'll sell this dump to the first bidder, and we'll put you in a place where you can't even buy a stick of gum without our permission. The antithesis line rose up, solid and final. A mother's duty is to teach her children that actions have consequences. Monday is a long way off, Julian. A lot can happen in a weekend. For instance, I might decide to spend every liquid cent I have on a donation to the state police pension fund. I'm sure they'd give me a very lovely escort to the courthouse then. I turned my back on them. I heard Julian scream something, a word no son should ever call his mother, but it didn't pierce the skin. It only confirmed what I already knew. I wasn't losing my children. I was losing my illusions. I walked back into the house and locked the door. I went to the desk and finished that text I started. Sunday night, 7 p.m. One last dinner at the house. Come prepared to discuss the future. If you are not here, consider your relationship with the estate permanently severed. I hit send. I sat in the darkening living room, the grandfather clock ticking behind me. I had survived the first skirmish. But Julian was right about one thing. Monday was coming. And if I didn't finish the liberation by then, the care facility would be my new reality. I picked up the phone to call Leo. He had been quiet, and silence from the fox was always more dangerous than the howling of the wolves. I heard a strange scratching at the back window. Not the wind, not a branch. A small, rhythmic scraping of metal on glass. Someone had bypassed the security at the gate, and they were coming through the kitchen window. The scratching sound was high-pitched, like a diamond-tipped needle tracing the edge of my history. I didn't call for the security guards at the front gate. My fear had been replaced by a weary, sharp-edged curiosity. I walked into the dark kitchen, the moonlight spilling across the checkered floor in cold, blue squares. There, silhouetted against the window, was Leo. He wasn't using a key. He was using a professional glass cutter. He was so focused on the pain that he didn't see me standing by the pantry, as still as a shadow. When the glass gave way with a soft pop, he reached in, turned the latch, and vaulted over the sink. He landed with the grace of a thief, but when he stood up and turned around, he found himself staring into the barrel of Arthur's old flashlight, the beam blinding him. The sliding door was always the weak point, wasn't it, Leo? I said. My voice was low, devoid of the maternal tremor he expected. Leo stumbled back, hitting the counter.
Mom. God.
You're going to give me a heart attack. A heart attack would be a natural consequence. Breaking into a secured residence is a criminal one, I said, keeping the light pinned on his face. He looked disheveled, frantic. The baby of the family was out of tricks. What is it, Leo? Did Julian send you? Or are you here to finish what you started in the basement? Leo wiped his face, his eyes darting toward the hallway. Julian is an idiot. He's outside shouting at gates while the lawyers circle. I'm the only one who realized that once you sign those papers on Monday, the liquid cash in the safe is gone forever. I just need a start, Mom. I'm in deep. I didn't tell you. I didn't tell anyone. I borrowed from people who don't care about inheritance timelines. If I don't have 50,000 by tomorrow morning, they aren't going to sue me. They're going to break me. There it was. The wound. For years, this confession would have set me running for my checkbook. I would have held him, told him we'd fix it, and emptied my savings to keep him whole. But looking at him now, I saw the cycle. I saw that my help had been the very thing that made him a man who broke into his mother's house at midnight. The thesis line whispered, "You are his only hope. If you don't save him, who will?" But the antithesis line roared back, "If I save him now, I am only paying for the next time he betrays me." "I'm not giving you the combination, Leo," I said. "Mom, please. I'm your son. Your baby." He stepped into the light, tears welling in his eyes. It was a masterful performance, one I'd bought 100 times before. "You have millions. What is 50,000? It's a rounding error to you. It's my life to me." "It's not about the money," I said, and for the first time, it was the absolute truth. "It's about the fact that you thought cutting my glass was easier than asking for forgiveness. It's about the fact that you see me as a resource to be harvested rather than a woman to be loved. You aren't drowning, Leo. You're just refusing to swim because you think I'm a life raft you can deflate whenever you need a patch." His face curdled. The tears vanished, replaced by a snarling desperation. "You've gone crazy. Sarah and Julian are right. You're cold. You're sitting on a hoard of wealth while your children suffer. Dad would be ashamed of you." "Your father," I said, stepping forward until I was inches from him, "would be ashamed that he raised a man who needs a glass cutter to talk to his mother. Now, get out. The way you came." Leo looked at the safe in the distance, then back at me. For a second, I saw a flicker of something truly dark in his eyes, a calculation of whether he could overpower a 72-year-old woman. I didn't flinch. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, black remote. "This is a silent panic alarm, Leo. The security team is 30 seconds away. If you move toward me, or that safe, I press it. Do you want to spend the weekend in a cell explaining why you were in my kitchen after midnight?" He stared at me, his chest heaving. The silence was thick with the rot of our relationship. Slowly, he backed toward the window. "You're dead to me," he hissed. "When they take you to that home on Monday, I'm going to be the one who signs the no visitors list. Enjoy your empty house, Eleanor." He scrambled back out the window and vanished into the shrubbery. I stood in the dark kitchen for a long time, listening to the silence return. I didn't cry. The tears had been used up on Tuesday. I picked up the phone and called the front gate. There was an intruder. "He's gone now. Secure the perimeter of the garden. And call a glass company. I need a board up tonight." I sat at the kitchen table, the broken glass glinting like diamonds on the floor. I realized then that the wound to wisdom arc was almost complete. The wound was the betrayal of my children. The wisdom was realizing that I didn't need their approval to be whole. I was the empowered survivor, and the protector I was becoming was protecting the only thing left worth saving, my dignity. I took out the list of guests for Sunday dinner. I added one more name, Robert Vaughn. And a note. "Bring the final documents. I want them to see me sign their names out of my life over the dessert course." Saturday morning broke, quiet and cold. I spent the day clearing out my personal items. I didn't pack for a nursing home. I packed for a trip. A long one. I had already booked a suite in a hotel in the city under a name they wouldn't recognize. I was liquidating my life, but I was also freeing it. By Saturday night, the mountain house was officially listed as under contract. The first major piece of their greed had been turned into a scholarship fund for children who actually knew the meaning of the word family. As I laid out the fine china for tomorrow's dinner, the phone rang. It was Julian. His voice was different, no longer screaming but shaking. "Mom? Something happened. At the mountain house. We went up there like you said, to look for the keys. But when we arrived, the locks were changed.
And there's a man there, Mom.
A man named Samuel Thorne.
He says he owns it now.
He says you sold it for half its value just to get rid of it. Tell me it's a lie. Tell me you didn't sell our house to that vulture." I looked at the gold-rimmed plate in my hand. "It isn't a lie, Julian. But I didn't sell it for half. I sold it for full market value. I just decided that the profit didn't belong to people who think I'm an existing structure. It belongs to the future. I'll see you tomorrow at 7. Don't be late. We're having roast chicken. I hung up before he could respond. The cliffhanger was no longer mine to endure. It was theirs. They were coming to dinner tomorrow thinking they could still save their inheritance. They had no idea they were coming to a funeral for their lifestyle. But as I went to close the curtains, I saw a black car I didn't recognize idling across the street. Not Julian's. Not Sarah's. Not Leo's. It was the law firm representing the Moral Capacity Board. They weren't waiting for Monday. They were serving the papers tonight. The heavy rapping on the front door didn't sound like a knock. It sounded like a gavel striking a bench. I didn't rush. I stood in front of the foyer mirror, smoothed the front of my silk blouse, and took a breath of cool, resolute air. The panic that would have gripped me a week ago was gone. I was no longer the woman afraid of losing her children. I was the woman afraid of losing herself. I opened the door to find two men in sharp, cheap suits holding a manila envelope that looked far too thin to carry the weight of a person's autonomy. Behind them, the black car idled, a predator waiting for its meal. "Eleanor Sterling?" the younger one asked, his eyes avoiding mine. "I am," I said, my voice projecting with the authority I had once used to manage a firm of 200 people while my husband traveled. "And you are interrupting my preparations for a family dinner. I assume those are the emergency guardianship papers my son Julian thinks will solve his liquidity problems." The server blinked, taken aback by my directness. Usually they find people in tears or in hiding. "This is a summons for an emergency competency hearing, ma'am, and an ex parte order for a psychological evaluation, effective immediately. You're required to accompany us to the medical center for a 72-hour observation." 72 hours. They didn't want a diagnosis. They wanted a lockout. If they kept me in a white room for 3 days, I would miss the deadline to transfer the trust. The scholarship fund would remain unfunded, the Mountain House sale could be contested as a manic transaction, and the dinner tomorrow would be held over my empty chair while they picked my safe. "I see," I said, reaching out to take the envelope. "But if you look at the date on that order, you'll find it was signed at 4:30 p.m. on a Friday. And if you look at the fine print under Section 4B of the State Civil Code, an ex parte medical order requires a witness signature from a direct family member who is not a primary beneficiary of the estate in question. Since my 3 children are the only petitioners, this order is legally insufficient for a forced transport." The two men looked at each other. They weren't lawyers. They were messengers. "Ma'am, we're just told to bring you in," the older one said, stepping forward. "And I am telling you that if you touch me, I will file a suit for kidnapping and battery against your agency before you reach the end of the driveway. My attorney, Robert Vaughn, is currently on a recorded line." I lied, holding up my phone with a blank screen flickering. "He is waiting for the badge number of the officer I assume you didn't bring, because an order like this requires a sheriff's presence for execution on private property." I saw the older server's shoulders drop. They had been told this would be an easy pickup of a confused grandmother. They hadn't been told she knew the civil code. "We'll have to call the office," the younger one muttered. "Do that." On the sidewalk, I said, and firmly closed the door. I leaned against the wood, my heart drumming a frantic rhythm. It worked, but only for an hour, maybe 2. They would call Julian. Julian would call the judge's clerk. A sheriff would eventually arrive. I had to finish the work tonight. I went to my desk and opened the secure laptop Robert had provided. My fingers flew across the keys. This was the liberation. I authorized the final sweep of the trust's cash reserves into the private foundation. I signed the deed transfer for the primary residence, my home, to be gifted to a historical preservation society upon my death, with a lifetime tenancy for myself. The existing structure would never be townhomes. It would be a library, a museum, a piece of the city forever. Then I did the one thing that truly severed the cord. I wrote the letter. To my children. You were raised with every advantage love and money could provide. You chose to value the latter over the former. Therefore, the latter is no longer yours to claim. I have left you each the sum of $10,000, Enough to cover your debts for a single month. Consider it the final loan from the mother you buried while she was still breathing. I printed it. I placed it in 3 neat envelopes on the dining table, positioned right where their dessert plates would be.
The phone rang.
It was Sarah.
Mom.
The server said you threatened them. How could you? We're trying to help you. You're paranoid, Mom. That Samuel Thorne has brainwashed you. I'm not paranoid, Sarah. I'm prepared, I said. And if you want to speak to me, do it tomorrow at 7. Bring your brothers. If you bring a lawyer or a sheriff, the door stays locked and the inheritance is reduced to 0 before you can say deposition. Do you understand? Mom, you can't. 7 o'clock, Sarah. The chicken is marinating. I suggest you decide if you want a meal or a war. I hung up and turned off the phone. The house was quiet again. I walked to the kitchen and looked at the roast chicken, the rosemary, the butter.
I did this every Tuesday for them.
I did it because I thought a table was a place of union. Tomorrow it would be a place of judgment. I looked at the grandfather clock. 10 o'clock on Saturday night. I went to the safe Leo had tried to break. I opened it easily. The combination was the date of my wedding anniversary, a date they had forgotten 3 years in a row. I took out a small, blue velvet box. It wasn't gold. It was Arthur's signet ring. I put it on my thumb. It was too big, but it felt heavy and real. I'm finishing it, Arthur. I whispered to the empty room. I'm not the victim anymore. I'm the protector. I went upstairs to sleep, but I didn't sleep in the master bed. I slept in the guest room, facing the street. I watched the black car drive away, then return, then drive away again. They were waiting for daylight. They were waiting for Monday. But I was waiting for Sunday, the day of the Last Supper. I woke up on Sunday morning to a silent house. But when I looked out the window, there was no black car. There was only a single, white lily lying on the doorstep. No card. No name. A lily, the flower of funerals. The fox, it seemed, had sent a message. The white lily was cold against my palm. I stood on the doorstep at dawn, the morning fog swirling around my ankles like restless spirits. A lily is for a funeral, a sign of transition, but in Leo's hands, it was a threat, a silent promise that the mother they knew was dead and gone. I didn't tremble. I took the flower into the kitchen, picked up the sharpest paring knife, and sliced the stem clean off before tossing it into the disposal. I wasn't having a funeral today. I was having a feast. The preparations for the Sunday dinner were meticulous. I didn't hire a caterer. I wanted them to smell the rosemary, to taste the specific richness of the gravy, to feel the weight of every domestic labor I had ever performed for them. As I massaged the butter into the skin of the chicken, I thought about the thesis line that had kept me captive for decades. If I make their world soft enough, they will never want to leave it. I had been a builder of nests, never realizing I was building a cage for my own freedom. By making their lives easy, I had made them weak. By shielding them from the world, I had shielded them from the necessity of character. By 4 p.m., the table was set with the gold-rimmed china. I placed the 3 envelopes, the $10,000 farewells, under each of their dessert spoons. I didn't feel malice. I felt the profound, chilling peace of a woman who has already left the building while her body is still standing in the parlor. Robert Vaughn arrived early, at 5:30. He didn't come through the front gate with fanfare. He came through the back service entrance I had left unlocked for him. He was carrying a leather attaché case that felt like a shield. Is the security team in place? I asked, pouring him a small glass of sherry. 2 in the mudroom, 2 in the library, Robert confirmed, his eyes tracking the perfection of the dining room. If they bring anyone, lawyers, servers, or that friendly judge, they won't get past the foyer. This is a private family dinner, Eleanor. As long as you don't sign a single thing they offer, the status quo holds until the banks open tomorrow. By then, the trust transfers will have cleared through the automated overnight system. Once the money is in the foundation, it's beyond the reach of any probate judge. And the guardianship hearing on Monday? They can hold it, Robert said with a grim smile. But they'll be arguing for the guardianship of a woman with empty pockets. Most predatory guardians lose interest when the commissions disappear. Julian's creditors certainly will. At 6:45 p.m., the gravel crunched in the driveway. I heard the three distinct sounds of their car doors slamming, Julian's heavy thump, Sarah's melodic click, and the sharp snap of Leo's sedan. They moved like a unit now, a desperate triumvirate united by the smell of vanishing assets. I met them at the door. I didn't wait for them to knock. Julian.
Sarah.
Leo, I said, stepping back to let them in. They looked tired. Sarah was wearing oversized sunglasses to hide what I suspected were frantic, sleepless eyes. Julian had a vein throbbing in his temple that kept time with the grandfather clock. Leo looked pale, his gaze darting toward the basement door, as if checking to see if I'd replace the glass. Mom, Julian said, his voice forced and low. Look, we just want to talk. This dinner, it's a good step. We brought your favorite wine. He held out a bottle of vintage red. It was a brand Arthur had loved. A peace offering from my own cellar, likely stolen months ago. I didn't comment. How thoughtful.
Put it on the sideboard.
Dinner is served. The meal was a performance of silence. The clinking of silver on china was the only soundtrack to the first 20 minutes. I watched them eat, my children, the people who shared my DNA, and none of my values. I watched them look at the empty chair where Arthur used to sit, not with grief, but with the irritation that he hadn't left a clearer path to his vault. This is good, Mom, Sarah said, her voice brittle as the crystal she held. Really like the old days. Before, things got complicated. Things are only as complicated as the secrets we keep, Sarah, I replied, sipping my water. I have no secrets left.
Do you?
Julian dropped his fork. It clattered against the gold rim.
Mom, enough.
We know about the mountain house. We know about the shell company. We know you're moving money. You're not well. You're being manipulated by Thorne and Vaughn. If you sign the residency agreement for Serenity Meadows tonight, we'll drop the competency hearing. We'll keep the house and the family. We'll make sure you're taken care of, but you have to stop this insanity before you ruin us. The antithesis line stood behind me like a bodyguard. A mother's duty is to speak the truth, even if it burns the house down. I'm not ruined, Julian. I'm released, I said, leaning forward. You talk about ruin as if you aren't already bankrupt in spirit. You came here tonight for a rescue mission, but you aren't the rescuers. You're the looters. Mom, Leo shouted, his hand trembling. I told you. I have people after me. If I don't get the trust draw, I'm dead. You're choosing a foundation for strangers over your son's life. I looked at my youngest, the baby. I saw the fox cornered and snapping. I chose your life for 25 years, Leo. I paid for your mistakes, your lies, and your leisure. If you are in debt to dangerous people, it is because you were arrogant enough to believe my signature was an infinite resource. I have stopped paying for your cowardice. You selfish old bitch, Julian hissed, the mask finally shattering. He stood up, towering over the table. You think you're so smart? We've already talked to the judge. We have the emergency order in the car. We didn't serve it yet because we wanted to give you one last chance to do this the easy way. Sign the papers or we call the sheriff right now. You'll be in a psychiatric lockup before the coffee is cold. I sat perfectly still. I looked at Sarah, who was looking at her plate. I looked at Leo, who was staring at the safe key I had visible on my wrist. The envelopes, I said quietly. Open them. Julian snatched the envelope from Sarah's place and ripped it open. He saw the check for $10,000. He saw the letter. His face turned a deep, bruised purple. 10,000?
10?
You have 50 million in the trust and you give us a tip. He crumpled the check and threw it into the gravy boat. You think this is a game? You're going to die in a state ward for this. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a phone, dialing the number for the judge's clerk. Yeah, this is Sterling. Send the escort. She's violent. She's delusional. We need immediate transport. I stood up slowly. I walked to the library doors and opened them. Robert, I said. Robert Vaughn stepped out, followed by the two security men. Julian stopped, the phone still at his ear. The sheriff won't be coming, Julian, Robert said, his voice like iron. Because I filed the restraining order at 5 p.m. It's based on the illegal entry recorded by the security cameras on Wednesday, the embezzlement records of the consulting fees, and the witness statement of one Samuel Thorne regarding your attempt to sell insider trust information. If any of you are on this property when the sun goes down, you won't be taking your mother to a ward. You'll be taking a ride to the central holding cell. The silence that followed was absolute. I looked at my children, 3 predators who had finally realized they were in a trap of their own making. But as Julian turned to snap at Leo, a muffled explosion sounded from the basement. A heavy, chemical smell filled the air. Leo wasn't just here to eat. He had brought something with him, a fail-safe to ensure that if he didn't get the money, no one would. The chemical stench hit me before the smoke did, a biting, artificial odor that clawed at the back of my throat. My heart didn't sink, it hardened. I looked at Leo, and for the first time, I didn't see the boy I had tucked into bed for a decade. I saw a man who would rather see the world burn than see it belong to anyone else. "What have you done, Leo?" I asked, my voice as cold as a tombstone. Leo didn't answer. He was already backing away, his eyes wide and vacant. But the answer came from the mudroom. One of the security guards rushed in, his face masked by a handkerchief. "The safe. He's used a thermal lance or some kind of chemical burn on the locking mechanism. It's ignited the vintage insulation in the walls." The parlor, which had been the site of a cold psychological war moments ago, was suddenly a death trap. Wisps of gray-white smoke began to curl through the floorboards. The floorboards Julian had measured for profit. The floorboards Sarah had curated for status. My legacy was literally going up in flames. "You idiot!" Julian screamed, lunging for Leo, but he wasn't trying to save the house. He was trying to save his leverage. "The files are in there. The trust documents." "They're gone, Julian," I said, standing amidst the rising haze. I didn't cough. I felt a strange, transcendent calm. "Everything you wanted, the gold, the deeds, the physical proof of your greed, it's all in that safe. If the heat is enough to ignite the walls, the paper is already ash." Sarah let out a piercing, jagged sob. Not for me, not for the home, for the life she had already spent in her head. She ran for the front door, Julian right behind her, neither of them looking back to see if I was following. They were rats, and the ship was sinking. But Leo stayed. He stood by the dining table, staring at the envelopes I had placed there. He grabbed his check, the $10,000, and shoved it into his pocket as if it were a life vest. He looked at me then, and I saw the true face of the fox. He had lost his future, and he was hunting for a scrap of the present. "Mom, come on." Robert Vaughn grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the garden exit. "The structure is old wood, Eleanor. It'll go up like a torch. We have to go." I took one last look at the table. The roast chicken, the rosemary, the gold china, the symbols of my servitude. I saw the fire beginning to lick the bottom of the grandfather clock. The ticking was getting faster, a frantic heartbeat of a house that had been holding its breath for far too long. "Let it go, Robert," I whispered. I walked out into the cool night air. I stood on the edge of the lawn, wrapped in a blanket the security guard had provided. I watched my children gather by their cars on the street.
They didn't come to me.
They stood together in a small, shivering cluster, watching the windows of the manor glow with an orange, predatory light. They weren't checking on their mother's health. They were watching their bank accounts evaporate. The thesis line tried one last time to haunt me. A house is the skin of a family. But the antithesis line was the only one that mattered now. A family is not built of stone, and a house is not a home if the people inside are hollow. The fire department arrived, their sirens wailing like mourners. They worked with a mechanical efficiency, but I knew and they knew that the house was too big and the wood too dry. As the roof over the parlor collapsed in a shower of sparks, I didn't feel the weight of loss. I felt the weight of 40 years of expectations falling away. Julian approached me then, his face smeared with soot, his expensive suit ruined. "It's gone, Mom. Everything is gone. The house insurance, the payout. It'll be tied up in arson investigations for years. Leo, they're going to find out it was Leo." He looked at me, waiting for me to panic, waiting for me to say I would lie to the police, waiting for me to save them again. Yes, they are, I said, looking him dead in the eye. And I will be the first witness they interview. I will tell them about the glass cutter. I will tell them about the basement. And I will tell them about the envelopes. Julian recoiled as if I'd slapped him. You'd send your own son to prison? To save what? A scholarship fund. I'm not sending him to prison to save a fund, Julian, I said, pulling the blanket tighter around my shoulders. I'm sending him to prison to save him from becoming you. In a cell, he might finally learn what a boundary looks like. He certainly never learned it at my table. I turned my back on him and walked to Samuel Thorne's silver sedan, which was parked quietly at the end of the drive. Samuel stepped out, watching the flames with a stoic, quiet respect. The mountain house is ready for you, Eleanor, he said. And the accounts have cleared. The foundation is active. Then let's go, I said. I've spent 72 years in this city. I think it's time I saw what the mountains look like in the morning. As we drove away, I looked through the rear window. The manor was a skeleton of fire against the black sky. My children were small, receding figures in the rearview mirror, still arguing amongst themselves in the dying light of the embers. They looked like strangers to me. They were the people I had raised, but they weren't my family. I was an empowered survivor. I was the woman who owned everything. Not because I had kept the house, but because I had kept my soul. The wound was cauterized by the flame. But as the car cleared the city limits, Samuel's phone rang. He looked at the caller ID and handed it to me without a word. It was the detective from the arson squad. Mrs. Sterling? We found something in the safe. Something that wasn't paper. Something your husband left for you 40 years ago that the chemicals didn't touch. The detective's voice was a low hum against the backdrop of the tires on the asphalt. I didn't feel the surge of anxiety I expected. I sat in the passenger seat of Samuel's car, the orange glow of my past fading into the distance behind us. What did you find, detective? I asked, my voice as steady as the mountain range we were approaching. It's a secondary compartment, Mrs. Sterling, hidden behind the bearer bonds. It was made of lead and high-grade titanium, an old firebox design. Whatever Leo's chemical lance did, it didn't penetrate this. We only found it because the heat cracked the outer casing. Do you want us to hold it, or do you want it brought to your current location? I looked at Samuel. He watched the road, but I saw the slight tension in his jaw. He had known Arthur's secrets as well as I had, perhaps even better. Bring it to the mountain house, I said. I'll be there in 2 hours. The drive was silent. The transition from the smoke of the city to the crisp, pine-scented air of the high country was a literal cleansing. As we climbed, the weight of the mother's duty seemed to stay in the valley below. I realized that my liberation wasn't just about the money or the fire, it was about the air. I could finally breathe without checking the oxygen levels of 3 greedy souls first. When we arrived at the mountain house, it wasn't the lonely retreat I had feared. It was solid. It was quiet. It was mine. Samuel helped me inside, and within 30 minutes, the detective arrived. He handed me a small, soot-stained metal box that felt heavier than its size suggested. I'll leave you to it, Eleanor, Samuel said, nodding to the box. He took a seat on the porch, lighting a pipe, giving me the space the moment demanded. I sat at the heavy oak table in the kitchen, the same table where Arthur and I had mapped out our dreams 40 years ago. I opened the box. Inside was a single leather-bound journal and a heavy, iron key that looked older than the house itself. I opened the journal to the first page. It wasn't a ledger of assets. It was a letter. My dearest Eleanor. The handwriting was unmistakably Arthur's, bold, sharp, and certain. If you are reading this, it means the house is gone, and the safe has failed you. It means our children have done exactly what I feared they would do when I saw them looking at the world with the eyes of customers rather than creators. I never told you about the third account because I knew your heart. I knew you would have emptied it to fix their mistakes the moment they asked. I knew you would have drowned yourself trying to keep them afloat. I felt a tear finally break the surface, tracking through the faint dust on my cheek. This iron key is for a small storage unit in the port of Lisbon. Inside are the original patents for the firm's first generation of software, assets I never put into the public trust. They have been earning royalties in a blind account for 30 years. It is the escape fund.
It is not for them.
It is for you to find the woman I fell in love with, the one who wanted to see the world, not just provide a floor for it. Use it to disappear, Eleanor.
Don't be their bank.
Be your own legacy. The antithesis line was complete. The wisdom had been passed from the man who knew me to the woman I had become. My husband hadn't just left me money, he had left me a permission slip. He had seen the rot coming and had built me a lifeboat that no divorce lawyer or greedy son could ever touch. The next morning, the sun rose over the peaks with a brilliance that made the city look like a memory of a bad dream. I walked out onto the porch, Arthur's signet ring catching the light. I saw Samuel looking up from his coffee. The detective says the arson investigation is moving forward, Samuel noted quietly. Leo is being questioned. Julian and Sarah have filed for a hardship draw from the foundation, but the board already denied them based on the moral turpitude clause. They're effectively cut off. I looked out at the forest. I thought about Julian's ruined suit, Sarah's fake tears, and Leo's chemical torch. I felt a pang, a ghost of the enabler trying to suggest I should call them. I pushed it back. A mother's final duty is to let her children face the winter they invited. Let the board handle it, I said. And call the travel agency, Samuel. I need a ticket to Lisbon. And I'd like to book a suite for two. Arthur's signet ring deserves to see the ocean one more time. Samuel smiled, a real, warm expression. I think Arthur would approve. I walked back into the house, but I didn't pack the silk scarves or the pearls. I packed a sturdy coat and a pair of walking shoes. I looked at the 3 envelopes I had kept in my handbag, the 3 crumpled checks for $10,000. I didn't burn them. I walked to the fireplace and placed them on the mantel. They were the price of admission to my new life. I was Eleanor Sterling. I was 72 years old. I had been abandoned by my children, and in that abandonment, I had found the woman they were too blind to see. I had owned the business, the land, and the assets, but for the first time in my life, I owned the day. I locked the mountain house door behind me, not with the fear of an intruder, but with the certainty of a woman who knows exactly who holds the keys. As the car pulled away toward the airport, I didn't look back at the mountains. I looked forward, toward the horizon where the blue of the sky met the blue of the sea. The structure was gone, but the foundation was unshakable. I was free. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to Voice of Jenna so you never miss the next chapter in our world of twists, lessons, and unforgettable moments. Your support means the world to me, and trust me, the stories only get better from here.